the ledger that divided a continent. It began with a single entry on a quiet morning.
A number so small it seemed harmless, yet powerful enough to fracture alliances and redraw destinies. Across Europe, no one saw it coming. To understand why this ledger mattered, we need to step back into an age when banking was not merely arithmetic, but a battleground of influence. Across the continent, kingdoms leaned on financiers the way empires lean on steel. A misplaced coin, an unbalanced account, a promise written too boldly, any of these could shift the fate of millions. Today, we see digital transactions fly across borders in seconds, but the core question remains the same: who controls the flow of trust, and at what cost? The first reveal comes quietly. A regional bank, modest in size but rich in ambition, began lending far beyond its means. Its leaders believed they were building a bridge to prosperity. What they truly built was a maze of obligations, each corridor darker than the last. A few insiders noticed the imbalance, whispered among themselves, but the world outside kept moving, unaware that the ground beneath it had already tilted. Then came the second beat. Rival states, sensing opportunity, used the bank's swollen balance sheet as leverage. Some saw it as a gift. Others saw it as a trap. But none understood how deeply the ledger's ink would stain the political fabric of Europe. Choices were made in candlelit rooms far from the public eye, choices that allowed debts to masquerade as strength, and confidence to grow where caution should have stood. And one more truth began to surface. The bank had started weaving its credit through towns, ports, and courts, binding regions together in ways no treaty ever had. The connections seemed beneficial, almost visionary. But beneath the surface, each link tightened into a chain that would soon be impossible to break. The story was no longer about a bank. It was about a continent slowly being split by invisible lines of obligation. The ledger's influence widened before anyone could measure it. Loans that once seemed routine now carried hidden conditions, and each signature bound another region to the bank's growing network. Officials praised the rapid expansion, calling it a new age of prosperity, yet none of them questioned why the numbers rose faster than the wealth behind them. The foundation was thin, but the illusion was thick enough to silence doubt. As the reveal deepened, merchants began to sense the shift. Prices no longer moved with supply or season, they moved with the bank's appetite for risk. Markets drifted away from the rhythms they had followed for generations, bending instead toward the institution's swelling ambitions. Some merchants thrived in the chaos, catching the wave as it lifted their fortunes. Others watched helplessly as their stability evaporated, replaced by a volatility they had never known. Whispers emerged from within the bank itself. Young clerks noticed discrepancies that their superiors brushed aside. Ledgers did not balance cleanly. Accounts seemed to multiply without clear origin. Credit flowed into hands that had no history of repayment. Yet anyone who dared ask questions encountered the same response: growth was the priority, and growth required faith, not scrutiny. It was a message repeated so often that even skeptics began to doubt their own concerns. This is where the early conflict took root. Rival states, already wary of one another, saw the bank's reach as a threat to their autonomy. Ministers sent quiet envoys to gauge whether the institution's expansion was strategic or accidental. What they discovered unnerved them. The bank had become indispensable to trade, taxation, and even military provisioning. Its influence exceeded that of several regional courts combined, and no ruler wanted to admit they had been outmaneuvered by a balance sheet. The tension sharpened when the bank attempted one more bold maneuver. It extended credit to a coastal territory known for its political instability, a region long avoided by cautious financiers. The deal promised immense profit, but it also exposed the institution to risks that prudent bankers would never accept. Some insiders celebrated the daring move, calling it a leap toward dominance. Others saw it as the moment the line between vision and recklessness finally disappeared. Beneath the surface, a fracture had begun to form. Every new loan, every new alliance, every confident declaration pushed the continent closer to a reckoning no one was prepared to face. The fracture widened as the bank's bold experiment strained the delicate balance that held the region together. At first, the consequences were subtle: a shipment delayed at a northern port, a tax levy recalculated without clear explanation, a merchant caravan rerouted for reasons no official could articulate.
Yet each disruption, small on its own, signaled a deeper truth. The bank's influence was no longer indirect. It was steering decisions that belonged to courts, councils, and crowns. Conflict emerged not with a dramatic declaration, but with quiet refusals. A coastal governor rejected a repayment schedule he deemed unrealistic. A group of nobles refused to endorse the bank's latest guarantees, claiming they were being asked to ensure a storm no one could predict. Their defiance emboldened others. Soon, murmurs of resistance traveled from city halls to trading floors, from guilds to garrisons. For the first time, people questioned whether the institution's reach had become dangerous. The bank, sensing weakness, pushed harder. It tightened terms, accelerated collections, and demanded faster compliance from regions already stretched thin. What had once been partnership now resembled control. The tone of its correspondence shifted. Gone were the polite courtesies of early agreements, in their place came veiled reminders of obligations, penalties, and consequences. The message was unmistakable: hesitation would not be tolerated. Then came the most destabilizing revelation. External auditors, invited only after pressure from multiple states, discovered that several of the bank's largest assets were not assets at all. They were promises layered upon promises, each dependent on the success of the next. If even one part of the structure failed, the entire system would collapse under its own weight. What had appeared to be strength was, in truth, a tower built on conjecture. Markets responded with fear. Traders who once cheered the bank's boldness now hesitated to extend credit. Goldsmiths refused to honor certificates connected to the institution. The coastal territory at the center of the crisis faced a sudden withdrawal of support, leaving its fragile government scrambling for stability. Across Europe, anxiety spread like frost, silent but consuming. As panic grew, the bank attempted a final display of confidence. Its leaders issued public declarations assuring citizens and rulers that all obligations were secured. But behind locked doors, they debated how long they could maintain the facade. Every hour brought new demands, new withdrawals, new doubts, and the institution's once unassailable ledger began to look like a battlefield. The tension reached its peak when rival states met in secret to consider a drastic solution. Some proposed dismantling the bank entirely, seizing its assets and rewriting the financial map before catastrophe could strike. Others argued that such a move would trigger the very collapse they feared. Between these competing visions, Europe stood on the edge of a precipice, held in place by uncertainty and pride. The build-up had reached its breaking point. The continent waited for a single event, one that would decide whether the bank would endure or whether the invisible lines it had drawn would tear Europe apart. The breaking point arrived not with thunder, but with a quiet refusal. A small province, overburdened, overlooked, and exhausted, announced it would no longer honor the bank's terms. The declaration rippled across Europe. What began as a regional dispute became the spark that illuminated every hidden weakness in the system. Other territories hesitated, then followed, each act of defiance widening the rift the bank had tried to conceal. In that moment, the facade collapsed. The bank's leaders convened in a final desperate assembly, hoping to salvage confidence. But the numbers no longer obeyed their intentions. Promises unraveled. Guarantees dissolved. Obligations that once bound the continent together now pulled it apart. Markets fell into turmoil as traders reassessed what was real and what had only seemed real. The world watched a financial titan crumble under the weight of its own ambition. The climax revealed a truth no one wanted to acknowledge: the bank had not divided the continent. It had merely exposed a division that had always existed, between those who held power and those who bore the consequences. The ledger had been a mirror, reflecting the fragile foundations beneath Europe's prosperity. And when the reflection cracked, the illusion shattered with it. In the aftermath, states convened emergency councils to rebuild trust in the financial system. New agreements were drafted, forged in caution rather than optimism. The continent emerged more aware, more skeptical, and more determined to prevent history from repeating itself. Yet the memory of the collapse lingered, a reminder that influence built on unchecked ambition will always reach a point where it can no longer stand. And as we reflect on this turning point, the relevance becomes clear. Our modern world, with its rapid transactions and intricate networks, faces similar pressures. The past whispers a warning: stability is never guaranteed, and transparency is worth more than the boldest promise. Subscribe to join the journey.